capacity changes. It changes seasonally. And then if you have a disability that changes your capacity day to day, I think it's really helpful to think about giving yourself a decision ahead of time of like, okay, in this type of flare up or this type of whatever, I have no expectation to write. And that I am still consistent because that was a decision I made ahead of time.
Hello, sunshine, and welcome back to the Neurodivergent Creative Pod. Today, I have a special guest, your grand coach, Isabel Sterling. Isabel has been my writing coach for like a year and a half.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And we just decided to graduate me out of coaching. So I'm flying with my own wings now, but we are co-hosting a really cool webinar coming up. And so I wanted to bring Isabel on so that we can kind of talk to you about what we're going to be talking about there, and we can riff and we can be a little more casual than we're going to be on that webinar.
Yeah.
So first of all, Isabel, which always feels silly to call you, but tell us about yourself, about your books, about all your jazz.
Yeah. So the reason Caitlin is like, it's weird to call you Isabel. Isabel's my author name. My real name is Sam Adams, but SEO for Sam Adams is not good because fear and historical figures and whatever. So way back in 2012, I was like, I need a pen name because I'm going to be an author one day. So yeah, I came up with Isabel Sterling. I liked the name Isabel. Sterling is the name of the town that I grew up in. So yeah, and so since I started writing in 2012, I have a traditionally published author. So I have 3 full-length novels out with Penguin Random House, These Witches Don't Burn, This Coven Won't Break, and The Coldest Touch. They're all twisty paranormal thrillers about magical queer girls, finding love after heartbreak. And I also have a couple of self-published titles under the name Charlotte Page, and is that all the booky stuff? Yeah, and I'm a master certified life coach, and I coach authors.
Yes. So this is where like the absolute magic happens, in my opinion, is because Isabel coaches like established career authors who are trying to balance like the creative flow of writing with the pressures and like the business side of writing for pay, like being a professional writer, an author whose career is writing, whether that's a full-time career or a part-time career. Like, whereas I am like, come, let us roll around in like a chinchilla dust bath of inspiration and like getting out of your like perfectionist imposter syndrome and stuff. I'm very much a first draft coach. And my favorite people to work with are people who they have an idea. They've had this idea maybe for years, even decades. And at this point, they're so scared to start writing it because they're afraid it won't live up to their expectations. And so the coaching that I do with those writers is very much around like being playful and like being willing to make mistakes and to just have it be kind of imperfect and messy and very first drafty. Whereas like your people, Isabel or Sam, if I can call you Sam.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's funny because it's like the same but different.
Yeah.
Because it's still a lot of the imposter syndrome, the, what if we made it simple? What if we focused on fun? Like it's still a lot of that. But really what I like to focus in on, like I love all my clients equally, but I do really love debut authors because they're really in that pinnacle of like they have gone from writing is this thing that they have been doing for a long time, some of them decades. And they have worked on it and they have worked on it and it was their hobby and it was their escape and it was their fun time. And then they get a book deal and then they're going to have a book that's going to be published into the world by, a publisher. It's like their dream come true. But now they're just stressed the fuck out. So they're in this like, what if it doesn't live up to expectations? What if my publisher decides that I was a bad investment and they won't buy any more books? And they're in that like, what if of the sort of like capitalism, like it's a product now. Like, how do I market? Like, do I have to be on TikTok? It's like a lot of that, like, I want to do it right. I don't want to screw it up. I don't want to mess up my chance. And all of that like anxiety and stress and tension and perfectionism makes it near impossible to enjoy writing if they're even writing at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've coached on that with me a lot because as I have become a writing coach myself, I'm like, I don't want to say I'm bogged down, but like I'm holding a lot of writing tension and writing questions that come in from my clients. And sometimes I can sort of like set those down and write a few chapters and be like, woo, yes, my novel is the king novel today. And other times I'm like, man, it's so hard to write because I've got all this other stuff on my mind. And we definitely coach on the same things, but I think that we coach authors at like different stages.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is why we have come up with this wonderful webinar, which is writing consistently without hustle. So Isabel is very practiced at like teaching to consistency, like speaking to that side of things, like, oh, here's how to like make it fun. Here's how to show up over time. And then I come in and I'm like, the pressure is actually capitalism. And here's how we're going to unpack that. And we're just bringing that together to make like a little love child webinar.
Yeah, I'm excited.
That is both. It's anti-hustle. It is consistency. But then I was like, you should come on the podcast. And I specifically would love to talk about how to stay consistent in a writing practice with disability. So how to accommodate yourself while still holding yourself to whatever consistency means for you. Because that is like the first place that the guilt shows up for me, is if I'm flared up or I'm really tired or like I missed my meds that day or something, like, and the writing doesn't happen, then I start to get down on myself.
Yeah.
And I already have such a limited time per week that I spend with my novel on novel day, which is Wednesday mornings, the occasional weekend session as well. But yeah, if I'm only spending like 3 to 4 to 8, let's be real, sometimes I'm like on a roll. And so I come back to it later in the day on a Wednesday. Love those days, but they don't always happen. So how do we like forgive ourselves? How do we self-accommodate?
Yeah. Love that. So I think what might be helpful is to start with like a definition of consistency and really thinking about what does that mean for you. And so the way that I have come to define consistency is that the days that you plan to write, you actually do write most of the time, not all of the time, not, and also, so for every single person that's different. So for me, I like to write about 5 days a week and I average an hour-ish per session on a good day, like an hour to 2 hours. Sometimes it's literally 20 minutes and that's totally fine. But so for me, that works well. I like to have a couple of days off a week. But there are also things that happen, like we can define consistency that makes room for disability, that makes room for emergencies.
Yeah.
And so like I recently, as I had a death in the family, there's a lot of grief. And which is not the same as disability, but it's a similar thing where it's like my brain couldn't write. Like for the whole month of June, I tried 5 times to write. I was like, there's 5 different times where I was like, I think it might be fun to like play with my story. And there were times where just the brain fog was like, I would open the document and my eyes would just like unfocus and glaze over and I just couldn't. And I didn't then make that mean I wasn't a consistent writer. I made it mean that I was in a position where now is not the time.
Yeah. And that's really the key. And that's where we come in as coaches, I think, is to grab that thought, the meaning making of like the circumstance that has happened, right? So you sit at the desk, you open the document, you look at the document. That fucking counts. Like you have interacted with your book today and no one in the world is going to fault you for saying like, my heart is too heavy. I am burdened with grief. I can't even focus on these words to make a coherent sentence. So like, no, I'm not going to, because what are you going to do? Just sit there and like write for 2 hours and get a couple sentences out and then end up deleting them later because
and feel miserable the whole time. Yeah, no,
No,
thank you.
like, especially in seasons of grief and like traumaversaries. Like, I have a hard time doing stuff in March because there were a lot of traumatic events that happened to me in March. And that happened years ago, but your body can wake up on the anniversary of a day that you have kind of forgotten about. The details are fuzzy, and your body's like, ding dong, terrible day.
Yeah.
Here's for
Yeah.
you. Yeah. And that's not even like getting into disability, where it's like, I literally don't know every day when I wake up what my energy level is going to be like, what my physical ability is going to be like, what my like mental bandwidth is going to be like. I don't know. You know, I just called in a refill on my ADHD meds. I don't know if they're going to get here Monday, so I might be unmedicated next week. I just never know. God, please pray for me that my ADHD pills get here, because I can't really focus well without them. That's the point, is
Yeah.
that they help me focus. Like, that's why I take a medication for my disabling neurodivergent brain.
You mentioned briefly sort of like the giving yourself like that self-accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this because I think sometimes it feels more socially acceptable. So, I mean, there's a lot of stigma, of course, with asking for accommodations. But like I've noticed that it tends to be like, well, the school should give an accommodation and the work should give an accommodation. But then somehow we don't think to give ourselves an accommodation.
Well, no, that's illegal.
Right?
No. And I have grace on grace on grace for everybody else, right? But then myself, like, I took a nap this morning because I was still really tired. My partner took the day off today because he's just had like a really exhausting work week, and he was like, I need a break. I need a day off. And I was like, I think I'm going to go lay back down for a little bit. And he's like, I will go with you. So we took a nap, and it was awesome. And then I woke up and I got to work. And I have been like, oh, do I need to feel guilty about this? And, you know, the answer is no, because time is fake and we're all going to die. And like, I can't micromanage a couple hours out of my day because I rested.
Yeah. So I have like a hack I do for myself with naps. So I keep a Google Calendar where I actually have on my podcast, The Author Burnout Cure, for the episode that's coming out. I think it's going to be episode 124, I think. I'm trying to pull my calendar. Where is it? Yeah, so it's going to drop on July 24th. So it'll probably be out. I don't know out when this is out. I don't know.
Yeah, this episode should come out on the 26th.
Beautiful. So it's already out. So if you're listening to this, it's already out. You can go check it out. I go in great detail on all of the ways that I use Google Calendar. But one of the things that I like to do, so I set up my week of like what I'm going to do, like what the plan is. And then as I live my life, I change the calendar to reflect what actually happened.
Oh, I do that too.
Yeah. And so here's the like why I do that, which might be the same for you, might be different. Part of it is like I have shit-tacular memory. So if you're like, oh, what did you do last week? I couldn't fucking tell you. No idea. And that includes what did I accomplish in my novel? Couldn't fucking tell you. But because I have my Google Calendar, I can look back and be like, okay, cool. This is the project that I was working on. This is what I got done. And I will literally put in where I took naps. Yeah. So I'm looking at last week. So July 8th through 12th, I took a nap for an hour and a half on Monday. And then I took a nap for an hour and a half on Saturday. And then I had just like a Friday afternoon, I just like chilled and watched TV like the whole afternoon. And so sometimes when I do that, I'll just put nap. And sometimes I'll put why I took a nap. So sometimes I'll put like existential dread nap.
I literally do that. I have blocked out areas of my calendar and said like, have an existential crisis and cry. And I'm like, because I want to look back and be like, oh yeah, I ended work early that day because I was having an existential crisis and needed to cry.
Yeah. And I think that just, it gives a way to normalize that that's okay that happened. Like there's been times where like in June, I took a lot of grief naps. Sometimes I take what I call an anxiety nap where just like my anxiety is so high. I'm just like, I just need to be unconscious and reset myself.
That's a great idea. I should do that.
Yeah. Highly recommend. It's fabulous.
Yeah. I have some great techniques for anxiety that I'm happy to teach you as well.
Yeah. Like I have, and I also just switched anxiety meds, so that's also helping. But like for part of it for me is I had a lot of really, really hard circumstances this spring. And so there were just times where I was like, it all hurts too much. I'd rather just be asleep for a bit.
Yeah,
And
I
that
think
was
that
like,
makes total sense.
yeah. And so for me, that was like an act of self-care to be like, you know what? I don't need to like push through and work more. Like I can just give myself a 2 hour like time to not think about it and just be asleep and be cozy with, because usually when I get to go take a nap, I have 2 dogs with me and at least and a cat. So I'm just like all cozy and loved.
Yeah.
But so putting it in the calendar, then when you go back and you're like, fuck, why didn't I get anything done last week? You can go back and see, oh, look, I did actually get all these things done and I was grieving. So I took a nap. Or I also will put like sometimes I just need to move my body.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that looks like doing yard work. I love to
Mm-hmm.
just like, there's something cathartic about like mowing the lawn or like pulling some weeds. Right now, I've been like chopping down, like, we have this one area of the yard that we have, it's like the side of our house that we have ignored for the last 2 years and it's completely overgrown. So I'm like
Mm-hmm.
cutting branches off of pine trees and like refining the little stairs, and it gets some of the energy out. And then also there's a very visual, like I did a thing. Key thing, defining what consistency means for you. So I'm a 5 day a week writer. Caitlin's a once a week
Once a week writer.
writer.
And it doesn't have to mean daily. I say that all the time.
Yeah.
Consistency doesn't have to mean daily.
Yeah. Like I've got, so I had you as a client who is once a week. I've had one of my clients right now is a twice a week writer. I have a lot of like 3 to 5 day a week writers. Like I don't know that I have anybody who plans to write 7 days a week. And if they do, I usually tell them not to plan that. I'm
That's
like, at least give yourself
fair.
a day off.
Like Stephen King does that, but he's Stephen King.
Yeah.
I
And
can't influence that man.
yeah.
I do think that I want to start maybe doing like a 3 days a week for just like an hour or two, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That would be great for me. I think that might start working better now because it's been going on like my 3rd year working on this novel, which also let's normalize the fact that sometimes it takes a long time to write a novel, especially if, you only have like that once or twice a week to work on it. This isn't, you can't compare yourself to other people.
Yeah.
Some people are like, oh yeah, I just write 10,000 words a day and I wrote my novel in a month. And I'm like, well, that's good for you. I no longer have NaNoWriMo energy,
Yeah. Yeah.
I did NaNoWriMo once in college and I was an RA and I had a boyfriend. I have no idea how I wrote 50,000 words.
I love that. My very best month ever was NaNoWriMo of 2013. And I wrote 90,000 words in 30 days. It was the second
Oh
book I
my
ever wrote.
God.
But keep it, at the time, I was single. I had a pretty, I did have a job, but it was a job I wrote during a lot of, I would just like, I'm like, oh, there's nothing urgent that's due today. And I would just write my book. Like every weekend I went into write-in. So it was like, I had nothing really in my life going on except for that book.
All right.
And so
then
like,
I can see it.
yeah. And so capacity changes. And so that is the thing, I think, especially it changes seasonally, like seasons of your life. When I was a foster parent for 3 years, like when I had a kiddo in the house, like very different writing capacity, very different capacity for anything because parenting is hard as fuck. So their capacity is just different. And then if you have a disability that changes your capacity day to day, I think it's really helpful to think about like just deciding ahead of time, like if I have a day that is, I have this many spoons, is not a writing day. But if I have this many spoons, it's a 20-minute writing session day. And if I have this many, it's an hour session. Like giving yourself like a decision ahead of time of like, okay, in this type of, flare up or this type of whatever, I have no expectation to write. And that I am still consistent because that was a decision I made ahead of time.
Ooh, that's very good. I like that. The decision ahead of time thing, I think relieves a lot of the like guilt and shame around it because there's so much guilt and shame in the disabled community about like, well, I can't do what I used to do. Especially if you used to be able-bodied or very high masking. Like I was very, very high masking That's how I did NaNoWriMo in college, is
Mhm.
because I did everything. And I was like, well, I'm simply going to do it all because I must. And now that I know I'm autistic and I have ADHD and I have fibromyalgia, like I'm very aware of and like responsible for my human body. And
Yeah.
my human body can't do all that.
Yeah.
So, no, I used to get up and run a 5K before the sun came up. That doesn't happen anymore. I don't really get up before the sun anymore.
The only reason I do is that my dumbass dog wakes me up at 5 a.m. for breakfast, and then
That
I go back to bed.
There you go. That's first sleep, second sleep right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes, you know what I just realized I just put together is that a lot of times on novel day, that is when I will feel like super tired. And so I'm more likely to take a nap because novel day feels more flexible than like a client meeting. I'm not going to flake on a client meeting, but I'll flake on my novel. And so that's something that I need to work on for me, because I don't want to flake on my novel. So what I can do is like reduce the ask and like reduce the barrier, because I'm like, well, I'm too tired to write for 3 hours. Well, can you write for 30 minutes and then go take a nap,
Yeah, I love that. I definitely do that too, where I'll be like, and I have found that for me, it's not obviously not every time, but a lot of the time if I catch myself procrastinating on my book, it's because I plan too much for the day. And sometimes it's not even conscious. It's like there was one time I remember I was just like dreading writing. And I'm like, why am I dreading writing this? I'm like really excited about this scene in the book. I don't understand. Like, it's going to be a cool scene. It's stuff that I like. I know what's going to happen. And so I pulled out, just like a piece of paper and wrote down like, why am I dreading this book? And I started writing down, and I realized that I was subconsciously expecting myself to write the entire chapter in that day. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh. And so I told myself, hey, we only got to do 10 minutes. Or I can't remember if it was 10 minutes or if it was like, we only got to write like the first first two paragraphs. And telling myself, we're not trying to do the whole thing. Then like the resistance just like immediately went away.
Yeah.
I tend to think like when you're not able to get started, either the goal's too high or it's your story instincts telling you that something's wrong in the story and you need to, or in like your plan of what to do that day.
Ooh, okay, that makes sense. So that actually comes up for my clients a lot, is they have a lot of resistance to writing something. And then when we sort of start digging around and excavating like where these thoughts and feelings are coming from, the result is, they end up saying like, I just hate writing this guy's POV. And I'm like, well, does your book need his POV? And they're like, no. Mm-hmm. And then they get to go in and like rearrange the story and not do a POV character that they hate writing. Because guess what? If you hate writing it, you're not going to have any fun.
Yeah. And really like it can sound so simplistic, but like prioritizing fun, I mean, just doing that is going to help you have a long writing life.
Yes, agreed. Fun, like novelty, which is why I really envy people who can write in like a random order.
Oh, I certainly cannot. Those people blow my mind.
I am a chronological bitch.
Yep.
I got to start at the top and work my way down. And I have some people who can jump around, and I have some people who are like, this week is chapter 1, next week is chapter 2, and then it's chapter 3. Like, and that's what you get. And all the respect in the world for both. But it's kind of like curly hair, straight hair. Like, I want what you have over there. Like, I wish I could jump around. And they're like, I wish I could start at the beginning.
I don't think they're wrong. I think their brain just work that way. My brain does not work that way.
Yeah, my brain doesn't do that.
Nope.
Which is interesting because having ADHD, I can like, it feels like I can have like 4 or 5 stacking 3D chess level thoughts at the same time. But like, I can't write my novel out of order. That's right. Like I can see the pattern in the movie where I'm like, well, that's the bad guy. And people are like, what? How did you know that's the bad guy? And I'm like, 'cause pattern recognition, but I can't write my novel out of order. Like,
Yeah, well, and for me, so I'm the same way. Like I'm always like, whenever I watch a lot of, I don't know, shows that have like a predictable pattern, and so I will be, talking to my spouse. I'm like, oh, I'm like, I'll bet you that this character is going to do this within the next two scenes. Like, well, like do that kind of stuff. But no,
mhm.
and I think for me, the reason I can't write out of order is that, like, even though I plot out in chunks where I more or less know the what happens, but the emotional aspect of it only comes when I actually write it. And so I'm not going to
Mm.
know how a character is truly feeling until I've written what comes before it. And so I have to go through chronologically to be able to follow like the emotional sort of like cause
That
and
makes
effect.
so much sense to me because also sometimes my characters go off book. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they don't follow what I said. And so if I have written something in the future and then they fuck up my plan midway to that future, well, now I have written a scene that is useless to me.
Yeah.
And they did it on purpose. And I think that is why I like writing chronologically. That's so interesting. So people who can jump around are either one, acting as an archaeologist and just writing what is coming to them, and they're going to figure out how it all fits together later. And I love that. It's chaotic and I love it. Or they are people who have like the plotting and planning kind of so tight that they are very aware of where they are headed. And there is nothing that could happen that would derail the plot so much that the scene that they wrote for the middle isn't relevant by the time they get there.
Yeah. Props to them.
I know, right? I'm thinking of two very specific writers in the incubator who write kind of here and there. And then I'm pretty sure like the rest of us are chronological.
So coming back to the consistency. So I just to kind of like tease out what we're going to teach. So it's the, setting what you're defining what your consistency is. It's like creating like that plan. And then part of that we've sort of talked about a little bit, but the second step of that I teach is, and the reason I pull it out as a separate step is because it's so important, but it's also such a subtle thing that it's easy to skip. And that is really committing to believing that what is doable for you is actually good enough. Because as soon as we get into the like I had a flare up, I missed a whole week, like now I'm never going to get there. Like when we get into that headspace, it's so much harder to restart writing.
Yes.
And then it just that like time away drags and drags and drags, and it can become months or years. But when we believe that, like, hey, I know that when this condition is flaring up and I, have to spend a week in bed, I'm still a consistent writer when my health is at a certain sort of like baseline. As soon as I'm kind of back at that baseline, I know I can get back to it.
Yeah. And that's a mindset thing.
Yeah.
It's what my therapist calls all or something, because he always points out when I'm doing something that's very all or nothing. And he's like, there is something in between, So I'm like, I either write every Wednesday for 4 hours or I am a failure. He's like, that's certainly an option to believe, right? What if I write 4 hours a week on Wednesday most of the time, and sometimes whatever I get is good enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So now in my mind, I know that I'm still writing this novel. I know that I am a consistent writer. I know that I am taking good care of myself and my story.
And I also love the idea that like your story will take care of you and will wait for you.
Yes. Yes. And that's not to say that, you can just leave it there forever and press pause for 20 years and then try to come back. But, sometimes maybe. But you're not going to miss out because you had to take a week off or even a month off.
Well, and this is also where I think it's really important to expand what we count as writing.
Yes, say more.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, and I see this with a lot of my clients, is they will only count it if they're adding actual words to the page.
Word count. Yes, no, but outlining counts.
Yes.
Brainstorming stuff about character, like motivations and their relationships counts. Like even researching like agents to query to counts as working on your book, because that's all legwork that builds like the story and then builds you toward publication.
Yeah.
There's so much more to writing than just words on a page.
Yeah. And sometimes I want to give you a metaphor that I sort of came up with in collaboration with one of my clients this week. So she started the metaphor and then I helped finish it for her. So she was talking about how like writing a novel is like actually doing the drafting is like going on a hike. And so
Mhm.
for her, she was totally fine. She did a lot of her brainstorming at the beginning. So she's like, that's, you're eating your big meal, you're carving up to go, whatever. And then she was fine with like, walking down the path. And she circles on herself when she drafts. So she'll write a little bit and then go back and tweak and then write a little bit. And she kind of does like a little bit circular kind of like fashion. And she's gotten to where she's really accepted that. But she has a hard time letting herself pause to brainstorm. She's like, well, I
Mm.
already had that big meal before I hiked. Even though it's been 8 hours, I'm not allowed to have a snack, kind of
Yeah.
a thing. And so we've kind of reframed brainstorming as like, okay, you're allowed to leave the drafting, leave the path on your hike and go find some berries to eat and then get back on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I do or now do very naturally. I used to be similar where I was like, if I'm not adding words to the page, it doesn't count. But now, like, if I feel stuck at all, I will turn a writing session into a brainstorming session, like
Ooh.
without any hesitation.
That's a great accommodation. To just,
Yeah.
if you sit down and the words aren't flowing, and then that's fine. Then you get a notepad and you start brainstorming out, sketching, what feels stuck.
Yeah.
The character, I just don't feel like they would make that decision. Okay, so what decision would they make?
Yeah.
This is also a great place to bring in like an oracle deck or a tarot deck
I
and
love
use
doing
that
that.
as like something to kind of play off of.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that, and I also will count too, like when I'm in between projects, is like I will count reading in the genre I'm going to write in next as part of my writing process.
Yes. Reading in the genre is so important. And that's something that my clients have been scared to do, right? Because they're like, well, what if I copy something? Or worse, what if I read something and it's basically my idea? And so now I should never, ever write it ever. And my response to that is like, first of all, nothing is perfectly original and unique, right? Like Lion King is just Hamlet. And also like being inspired and liking stuff in books. Like I love when I'm reading something and I'm like, I don't like how they did that, or I really like how they did that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're reading as a writer, it's totally different. And sometimes that's frustrating. And I wish I could turn it off and just read as a reader. But I'm like always reading as a writer. And something that I notice is, something big will happen. And I'll glance down at the Kindle percentage and it's like, you're 48% through the book. And I'm like, I know I'm 48% through the book because this is midpoint activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the midpoint. And especially with memoir, I love having people read similar memoirs to what they're writing because there's so many ways to frame a memoir. Like you can do chronological, you can start at like, here's where I am today, and now I'm going to tell you how I got here. It can be totally random and disjointed. And the biggest question that I get from my memoir writers is, how do I know what order to put this together in? And I'm like, so the fun part is that's totally up to you.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can like practice without having to practice is by reading other memoir and seeing how other people have done it and what you like and dislike about each one.
Yeah. And then you just have to be onto yourself. So onto your brain. And so it's great to have a coach in your corner because so right now I am starting to work on a nonfiction project that is like connected to what I teach as a coach. And so I've been doing some competitive title research, looking at like what's in the market, what gap does this fill? And I catch my brain like looking at what other people have done and being like, oh, well, they've already done it, so I shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the way they have it structured is probably better than what I was thinking. And just being aware that like the brain is naturally going to look for where you're different, where you're not fitting in, where you're doing things wrong. And also it's that sneaky, like your brain's like, well, I guess we just don't have to spend the energy or risk rejection and just not do it at all.
That part. It comes in and
Yeah.
it's like, shouldn't you quit?
Wouldn't that just
Shouldn't
be
you
easier?
stop? It's not, you shouldn't do this. It's really dangerous. Here's 5 reasons why. Somebody else already wrote this. The market is saturated with things like this and it won't even get published. So why risk it?
Mm-hmm.
And like, these are all simply stories.
Yeah. Because it's also equally true that there are people like there's I couldn't find anybody who has written what I want to write in the exact sort of like lens, like the exact sort of audience that I want to do. And also nobody like I haven't written it yet, so my version of thinking about it isn't out
Mhm.
there. And there are billions of people in the world and we all connect to different people differently. There are so many writing coaches and author coaches who teach very similar things, maybe have the same coaching certifications that we do, but people gravitate to us for the exact sort of like amalgamation of who we are.
Right. I collect weirdos with trauma and autism. Like, I can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just who I speak to. It's who I make feel safe, like inherently, by taking up the space that I take up. And I've thought things like, if I worked with high ticket life coaches to like write memoirs, I could bring in a lot more money. And then I'm like, I don't want to do that. Those are not the
Yeah.
people I want to work with.
Yeah.
I want to work with like my first drafters who are worried that they're not doing it right, so that
Yeah.
we can like build this little queer commune on the internet of people writing books.
Yeah. It's so good. Yeah. And I have a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think I have similar in that I've got a lot of very like feminist folks. I've got a lot of queer folks and just people who really write books that deeply matter to them. And like one of my clients, is writing a book that has, disability rep in like a vampire book. Like how fucking
Mhm.
cool is that?
Yes.
So I just like I love to see and just I don't know. I also like I don't know. I just want to like grab all my debut authors and just like hug them. It's like it's gonna be
I
okay.
know.
It's
I
gonna be okay. I
know.
promise.
I'm very much the same. All right.
Yeah, we'll wrap up. I got real quick the last couple of things with consistency. So we've got creating your realistic plan, committing to believing it's good enough. Then you got to cultivate a useful emotion.
Mm.
So, and you talked about earlier, like willingness. I
Mhm.
love to help folks cultivate like maybe curiosity for their story
Yeah,
or,
curiosity is very good.
yeah. And like, excitement is sometimes like we see as like the holy grail of like, that's like the best way to write and feeling excited and inspired sometimes, but sometimes it's willing. Sometimes pettiness can get you to the page and that's okay too.
Yeah.
And then the final big thing, and so we'll talk about all of this more at the webinar, but celebrating after every single writing session is key. And it can be as simple as I have a worksheet that I give everybody. And so folks go to my website, isabelsterling.com, I think /resources. I don't know. If you go to just the main website and you can click around and find it. But I have just like a worksheet that allows you to plan what you're going to do for the session, write down what you're excited about or looking forward to find that like positive, useful emotion. And then at the end, we collect what did I do and what am I
Mhm.
proud of?
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah. And just doing that teaches your brain that writing isn't painful. It's like a good experience because you're ending with like feeling good in your body about what you did.
Yeah, and you get the accomplishment dopamine of like writing it down in the journal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very good. I love
Yeah.
that.
Thanks.
Awesome. So yes, come and see us. The webinar is Friday, August 2nd it's August 2nd, right?
Yep.
Yes.
August 2nd at 6:30
August 2nd,
p.m.
6:30 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to be teaching about consistency. We're going to be unlearning capitalism, hustle culture. We are going to be joking and having a fun vibe because that's who we are as people. And we will also be announcing something super fun about my upcoming writing retreat.
Woo woo. Yeah. And so to sign up, it's isabelsterling.com/no-hustle.
Yes. And we will put a link to that in the show notes on YouTube and on all the podcasts. And yeah, hopefully we will see you on Friday, August 2nd.
Yay.
Yay. All right, Isabel. Well, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. And I am really looking forward to this webinar and future collaborations.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you for having me.